The wind rolled slowly across the Wyoming valley, bending the dry grass and whispering against the pine trees that surrounded the lonely cabin. Caleb Turner had lived there for nearly 10 years, far from towns, far from people, far from anything that reminded him of the life he used to have. Out here there were only cattle, mountains, and the long, quiet nights. Most men feared that kind of silence. Caleb had learned to live inside it. That morning began like any other. The sun was just beginning to climb over the distant ridge when Caleb stepped out of the cabin with a tin cup of coffee in his hand. The air was cold enough to sting his lungs. Frost covered the ground like a thin sheet of glass. He walked toward the small wooden fence where his horse, Ranger, stood waiting for feed. Ranger snorted softly when he saw Caleb approaching. But halfway across the yard, Caleb stopped walking. Something was wrong. There was something lying in the snow just a few steps from his cabin door. Something long, dark, still. Caleb narrowed his eyes. It hadn't been there last night. He moved slowly toward it, every instinct telling him to stay cautious. Out here, strange things rarely meant good news. The shape became clearer with each step, until finally Caleb saw exactly what it was. A coffin. A long wooden coffin sat directly in front of his cabin porch. The wood looked old but carefully built, the lid nailed shut with dark iron spikes. Frost covered the surface, but there were marks in the snow around it like it had been dragged there during the night. Caleb stood over it for a moment, silent. No wagon tracks, no horse prints, nothing except the drag marks that ended exactly where the coffin rested now. He set his coffee down on the porch railing and crouched beside it. The wood felt cold as stone. Whoever had left this here had done it quietly. Too quietly. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Funny place to leave a box," he muttered. He circled the coffin once, studying it. The boards were thick pine, hand-built, not something cheap. Whoever made it had known their work. But something else bothered him. He placed his palm against the lid. Then he froze. For a moment he thought it was imagination, but then he felt it again. Movement. Very faint. Something inside the coffin shifted. Caleb stepped back instantly. His hand dropped toward the revolver at his belt. His heart slowed into the steady rhythm he had learned long ago in dangerous situations. A coffin, with something alive inside it. That made no sense. Another weak thump sounded from inside the box. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Well," he said quietly, "guess we're opening it." He grabbed a crowbar from beside the porch and knelt beside the coffin again. The iron nails resisted at first, screeching as he forced the tool beneath the lid. One by one, they loosened. Whoever sealed this coffin had meant for it to stay closed. The final nail popped free. Caleb lifted the lid slowly. Cold air spilled into the coffin. Inside lay a young woman wrapped in a thick blanket. Her skin was pale from the cold, and her dark hair spilled across the rough wood beneath her. Her eyes were closed, but her chest moved faintly with shallow breaths. She was alive. Caleb stared down at her, stunned. "Hell," he whispered. The woman suddenly gasped, her eyes snapping open in panic. She struggled weakly against the blanket, disoriented and terrified. "Easy," Caleb said quickly, holding up his hands. "Easy now." Her breathing was sharp and uneven as she looked around wildly. Where am I?" she whispered. "My ranch," Caleb answered. "More importantly, how'd you end up in a coffin on my porch?" The woman tried to sit up, but her strength failed. Caleb carefully helped her out of the box and wrapped another coat around her shoulders. She trembled violently from the cold. "Inside," he said. "You're freezing." He guided her into the cabin and set her beside the fire. Ranger snorted nervously outside, as if sensing something unusual in the air. Caleb poured hot coffee into a mug and handed it to her. She gripped it with shaking hands. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, she looked up at him. "My name is Emily," she said weakly. Caleb nodded. "Caleb Turner." Emily swallowed slowly. "They tried to bury me." The words hung in the warm cabin air like smoke. Caleb leaned forward slightly. Who? Emily's eyes filled with fear as she stared toward the door. Men from the Black Ridge mine, she whispered. They thought I saw something I shouldn't have. Caleb's expression hardened. The Black Ridge mine was 10 miles east, a rough place run by rough men. What did you see? He asked quietly. Emily hesitated, then spoke. A body. The fire cracked loudly in the stove. Caleb felt the weight of those words settle over the room. You sure about that? He asked. Emily nodded slowly. They caught me watching, then everything went dark. Caleb rubbed his beard thoughtfully. Someone had knocked her out, sealed her inside a coffin, and dumped her here in the middle of the night. But why here? He walked to the window and looked out across the empty valley. Whoever left that coffin knew exactly where he lived, and they wanted the girl found, or they wanted Caleb involved. Behind him, Emily's voice trembled. They'll come looking for me. Caleb turned slowly. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying snow across the fields. He looked back toward the coffin still sitting outside in the yard. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, far bigger than a frightened girl and a few miners. Caleb rested his hand on the revolver at his belt. Well, he said quietly, guess trouble finally found my cabin. And for the first time in 10 quiet years, Caleb Turner realized the peace of his lonely ranch had just come to an end. The wind outside picked up again, brushing snow across the frozen ground and pushing it against the walls of the cabin. Caleb stood near the window for a moment, staring across the empty valley as if expecting riders to appear at any second. Nothing moved out there except the blowing snow and the thin line of pine trees bending under the cold wind. Behind him, Emily sat near the fire, slowly warming her hands around the tin mug Caleb had given her. Her breathing had steadied, but the fear in her eyes had not faded. Caleb turned back toward her. Start from the beginning, he said calmly. Everything you remember. Emily nodded weakly and took a careful sip of the hot coffee. The warmth seemed to bring some color back into her pale face. I was working at the Black Ridge mine, she began. Just bookkeeping. I never went near the digging sites. Caleb pulled a chair closer to the stove and sat across from her, listening. 3 nights ago, she continued quietly, I was leaving the office late. I heard voices near the lower tunnel. I shouldn't have gone closer, but I did. Her hands tightened around the mug. 2 men were dragging someone out of the tunnel. He wasn't moving. I think he was already dead. Caleb's jaw hardened. The foreman? He asked. She shook her head slowly. No, a worker. Someone who must have found something. Caleb leaned forward slightly. What kind of something? Emily looked up at him. Gold. The word hung in the air like a spark. Caleb frowned. Black Ridge was already a gold mine, but there were always rumors of deeper veins, richer deposits that could make men kill to keep secret. They saw me watching, Emily continued. One of them grabbed me. I tried to run, but something hit my head. She touched the side of her temple unconsciously. When I woke up, I was inside the coffin. The fire snapped loudly in the stove. Caleb stood slowly and walked to the door. He opened it just enough to look outside. The coffin still sat in the snow where he had left it, half covered now by blowing powder. Did you hear anything while you were inside it? He asked over his shoulder. Emily nodded. A wagon, I think. It stopped for a while, then left. Caleb stepped back inside and closed the door again. They didn't bury you, he said thoughtfully. Emily shook her head. No. Caleb stared toward the coffin again, thinking hard. Which means they didn't want you dead. Emily looked confused. Then why seal me inside a coffin? Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. Because they wanted you gone. Quietly. Emily swallowed. Gone where? Caleb walked to the window again. Out here, he said quietly. Miles from town. Miles from anyone. Emily stared at him. You think they expected me to die out here? Caleb didn't answer immediately. The wind howled against the cabin again, rattling the wooden shutters. Finally, he spoke. Maybe. A long silence followed. Then Emily whispered, "But someone left me on your porch." Caleb nodded slowly. That was the part that didn't fit. Someone from that wagon had dragged the coffin across his yard and left it directly in front of his door. Not buried, not hidden, just left. Which means someone else was there, Caleb said quietly. Someone who didn't want you dead. Emily's eyes widened slightly. Before either of them could say another word, Ranger suddenly whinnied loudly outside. Caleb's head snapped toward the door. The horse never made noise unless something was wrong. Then came the sound. Caleb heard it clearly this time. Hoofbeats, far off, but coming closer. He moved quickly, blowing out the lamp near the window and grabbing his rifle from the wall. Stay low, he told Emily. The hoofbeats grew louder now, more than one rider. Snow crunched beneath hooves outside the cabin yard. Caleb stepped beside the window and carefully lifted the corner of the curtain. 3 riders emerged from the swirling snow. They wore long coats and wide hats pulled low over their faces. Caleb recognized one of them immediately, the Black Ridge foreman. Just as Emily had feared, they had come for her. The riders stopped near the coffin. One of the men dismounted and kicked the side of it. Empty, he growled. Caleb slowly cocked the rifle. The man looked toward the cabin door. He's got her, the foreman said calmly. Caleb lowered the curtain and looked at Emily. Her face had gone pale again. They found me, she whispered. Caleb checked the rifle chamber calmly. Yeah, he said quietly. Outside, the riders began walking toward the porch, boots crunching through the snow. The wind howled across the valley again, but inside the cabin the air had gone completely still. Caleb moved toward the door and rested one hand on the handle. He looked back once at Emily. You picked one hell of a place to wake up, he said. Then he opened the door. The storm rushed in, and so did the trouble that had followed the coffin to his lonely cabin.